Hi everyone, the purpose of this video is to walk through a quantitative research article. This is a peer-reviewed, published research article in the journal Research in Higher Education, and I am going to be walking through the sections of the research article and commenting on some of the basic ideas behind what you might look for in a quantitative research article, the approaches that you will see that are often expected in a quantitative research article, and that will at times differ from a qualitative approach. So the title of this article is College Costs and Credit Cards, How Student Credit Card Use Influences College Degree Attainment. The purpose of the article is to look at the connection between credit card use and whether college students graduate based on some of these links between risky credit card behavior, socioeconomic status, and other factors. You can see there's an abstract here, and this really varies depending on the journal. So there's not one specific expected way to write an abstract. That often really varies by the journal. Similarly, some of the sections within the article might vary slightly depending on the journal you're submitting to. So this does have an abstract that gives a basic overview of the literature and the key components of what's happened, like why students might pay for tuition using a credit card, for example, because they're not getting the kind of financial support from rising tuition prices and declined state funding, for example. And then it talks about the basic methods of what data set was used, and the primary findings that the paper found. So if you're looking for a number of different articles to put together a literature review or an annotated bibliography, an abstract is a great place to start. This is not unique to quantitative articles, but I usually recommend that folks look at the abstract, then read the conclusion of the article, and see if it's on track with what they need for their purposes. And then if it is, and if it's related, then read the whole article to get more information. So this article starts with an introduction, which is kind of background information talking about how college funding and the financial support available through things like the GI Bill and Pell Grants, tracing those changes since World War II, and how that puts students into kind of a need to rely on loans and other personal payment options for college tuition. This is something that is background information that is setting up the literature review that starts here, College Students and Credit Card Use in the 2000s. Now, it's enough background information that it's narrowing down to the specific focus of the article. It's important to remember in quantitative research articles that much of the literature review not only is setting up the conceptual premise for the study, but is also really specifically outlining possible variables to be used in the study. This is really important for a quantitative research article. It is expected that quantitative researchers will evaluate literature, incorporate descriptions of literature that are connected to the variables they plan to use, or that show the lack of use of certain variables they might want to use in their models for their study. This also might include descriptions of what data have been used, if they're national surveys, if they're limited in terms of their scope. Maybe there's somebody who did a local survey at one institution with 100 people. It's very likely that some of these critiques will come into the literature review to say this is not enough data for us to have strong conclusions about this topic, so we need more information or more research. So that's what's happening in this literature review. Is it's giving the conceptual background, but it's also really setting up the variables and the data that are used for the study. And you can see this here in this heading, Attaining a College Degree, What Matters. This is literally setting up the predictor variables for the regression model all the way back in the literature review. So what matters means what is influencing, the attainment of a college degree. And so you can see that this is, again, conceptual background, and also setting up the variables to be used in the model. It gets more specific to financial factors. This article is specifically about what financial factors, this kind of newer approach for credit cards, what of those factors are related to college degree outcomes. And so it's going to spend some time in the literature review talking about what has been done so far. What literature has really considered these financial factors, because not all literature on the college student graduation outcomes or the college student experience deal with financial factors. Many areas of research don't. And so this is looking specifically at those financial factors and then leads right into the current study. So the current study is a section that's going to describe specifically what is the focus of this study, and it will include things like research questions and hypotheses. You can see that the research questions are embedded in the paragraph here. This paper considers questions including to what extent does credit card ownership, e.g. owning a credit card at all, having several credit cards, relate to educational outcomes like bachelor's degree attainment, and to what extent does carrying credit card debt from month to month relate to educational outcomes like bachelor's degree attainment. Some articles would be more likely to bullet these out so that they're a little easier to read. This article embeds them in the paragraph themselves. Sometimes in quantitative articles, there are also hypotheses attached to these research questions. This is not one of them. I'm just skimming through this second paragraph here. There are some ideas of maybe what outcomes might happen, but no strong hypotheses that are setting up the possible outcomes in that inferential statistics kind of way. After describing the current study, quantitative articles always go into methods, which include what data were used, in this case the Education Longitudinal Study from the National Center for Education Statistics. It will describe sample size, which includes, here are the total possible respondents. The author refined the sample down into a smaller sample size, which ultimately landed here, 2,773. The description of variables is very common in methods. Sometimes I see this done very explicitly like this. Here's how the variables are defined. Here's how I operationalize them. Others, it's a little more conceptual, and then you find out more later in their findings. But usually you can keep an eye out for the variable section within that method section. And these should connect back to the literature review. There should be some very strong connections between what variables that are used in the study to what variables are talked about in the literature review. There's a description of statistical analyses in this article, and this is how this author went about analyzing the data, which is descriptive analyses at first and then logistic regression models. You should then see those borne out in the rest of the article as well. Very common in quantitative research articles to also see equations in terms of how these statistical analyses are done, and tables with descriptive statistics. So these are descriptive statistics for all the variables that are used in the models. You can see different parts here. These are percentages here. The formatting is a little funny here. But this is mean, standard deviation, minimum, maximum, and then n, which is the sample size. You can see, you can read this by looking at, okay, the respondent has a credit card in their own name. 47% of the sample had a credit card in their own name. How many credit cards a respondent has in their own name? The average is 0.82. Probably a better indicator would be median, since these are integers, not a scale variable. But the standard descriptive statistics approach here is more about percentages. Respondent carries balance on credit card from month to month. No credit card is 53%. You see that lines up with 47% here. And then 34%, 14%. It should add up to 100%. These also show you information on how the variables are operationalized. So minimum, maximum, if it's 0 and 1, that's a dummy variable or a dichotomous variable. You can see race is operationalized 0 to 4, which is 5 categories. And we see that here, white, Asian, black, Hispanic, and other. So these should make sense. These should line up in terms of how we understand our variables. And it's really good to get acquainted with the descriptive table. Hopefully the quantitative article has them. They don't always, and sometimes they're tucked away in the appendix. But this is always a really, really important thing to have for any quantitative research they might do, because it's something that tells the reader a lot about how you created your variables and how they might then look in the model itself when you're actually conducting the regression. Some more discussion about the equations for the statistical analyses. Not all articles have that kind of equation focus. This journal is a well-regarded, pretty quantitatively focused journal, and so it expected more of that. You can see this is turned sideways because of size, but this is logistic regression models. These are the main analyses here. This is the big part of the quantitative research article is reporting these statistical analyses, and this is probably for experienced quantitative researchers, this might be the first page they flip to because you can tell basically everything you need to know about the article from this table. Now that's not really the focus of this class, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but these are how these regression models are reported. Okay, and so down here, there's the results section, and the results section really focuses on reporting the results from those regression models from descriptive statistics. And you can see there are some visuals here. And the important thing within quantitative research articles is to report any visuals need to stand alone, like you can read them and understand them by themselves, but also they need to be paired with a narrative that describes them and explains them too. You can see that right here we see that the highest percentage for people who do not finish with a bachelor's degree in that darker blue category is in the group of those who carry the balance on the credit card from month to month. So this is already suggesting some descriptive analyses, descriptive associations that carrying a balance on a credit card might have an outcome toward not achieving a bachelor's degree from financial pressure, from having to work more to pay it off, those kind of things. And logistic regression models, of course, they were already presented up higher. That was the choice of the article to present those higher. Some of that is done in the editing and publication process. But these are all describing what those regression models said, the main findings from the regression models. This part was like a matching method, Mahalanobis distance matching model, and that's in connection with the logistic regression models, but not the same. So again, some of this is beyond the scope of this class, so I'm not going to go too much into it. The results really report the results specific to what you see in the tables and the statistical analyses. They do not interpret the results yet. There's often a limitations section that the author will talk about. Here is what I can't say about the findings. Here's where this article doesn't give us full information. That's an important thing to include. And then the discussion really is the main part of the article where the author is interpreting the results. What does this mean? What is the significance of these findings, these results for the research, for our understanding of this topic in the field? And there's then usually a conclusion. Sometimes the discussion and conclusion are um, put together, merged together in the same section, but in this case, discussion and conclusion are often separated as well. So you might see it both ways, I guess is what I'm saying. The conclusion is more about the overarching end of the article, where the discussion is more what is the significance of the findings and results. And that is one example of a quantitative research article. You might have some appendix items that give the actual survey items. This how many credit cards you have in your own name that are billed to you. That's how the survey question was actually written and administered, with some notes here on that process. You will see some variation in other quantitative research articles, but many of these main ideas I've talked about are common across several different quantitative research article approaches.